Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Late Friday night, some massive news for the Miami Hurricane fans coming out of the recruiting trail. Three-star defensive lineman Micah Newton flipping his commitment from NC State to this Miami Hurricanes program. Now, where I want to start with Micah Newton is kind of a funny story. I was breaking down the film of his teammate Jarquez Carter, and I just kind of noticed this other defensive lineman absolutely dominating as well with Jarquez Carter down there at Newberry, Florida. That's how Micah Newton got on my radar. I really like this kid. I mean, he has not necessarily the prototypical defensive line frame at only 6'2", 255 pounds. But what I would tell Miami fans is, hey, we just saw an edge rusher come out of Miami Central 2 cycles ago. His name goes by Ruben Bain, was also a very similar kind of body type on the defensive line. Now, am I going to get up in front of you guys and say that Micah Newton is going to be Ruben Bain 2.0? No, I'm not. Ruben Bain was a little bit more physically imposing at this age than Micah Newton. That being said, what better defensive lineman for Micah Newton to come into this Miami Hurricanes program and learn from than Ruben Bain, who's going to be going into year 3. I mean, they have very similar kind of body types. They modeled their game very, very similar as well. I really do like kind of putting them in the same room as Ruben Bain and letting Ruben Bain kind of rub off on a guy like Micah Newton. Now, you get into Micah Newton, I think my favorite 2 aspects about his game is that, one, the motor runs so hot. I mean, this kid plays 100% effort every single snap that you see. And I love that out of defensive linemen, especially at the high school ranks where you get a lot of these really talented kids that every single rep, it's kind of, you don't know what you're going to get. You see the flashes of dominance. Micah Newton, there's no question about this kid's motor and effort level. He's one of those guys that you kind of want to just fill your defense with. And I think secondly, Micah Newton gives you a lot of versatility. This is a guy that at 6'5" or 6'2", 255 pounds, he's compact, he's strong, he can play that 3-tech position. I wouldn't be surprised if he transitions to an interior defensive lineman at some point down the road because this kid's put together. Now, he can also give you edge rusher reps as well, kind of like Akeem Mesidor, where you can play him as a 3-tech, you can play him as an edge rusher, do a lot of different things with. You talk about getting your best players on the football field, having versatility like Micah Newton certainly helps. Want to get into the film of Micah Newton, talk about what he brings to this Miami Hurricanes program. Now, before we get into it, as always, huge shout out to the Miami Hurricane fans. Listen, there's nothing I'd rather be doing on my Friday nights than talking some Miami Hurricanes football on the recruiting trail. The amount of support y'all continue to show, it absolutely means the world. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into Micah Newton. Now, I think it's really worth noting that NC State really liked this kid. They went right down into the state of Florida and got his commitment early. Why I think that's notable, I have a ton of respect in terms of NC State's player personnel department, in terms of their scouting, their evaluation of these kind of quote-unquote diamonds in the rough, right? NC State routinely picks these kids out and kind of identifies that talent, and they always seem to put it together at the collegiate level. So the fact that NC State liked him, I think that means a lot for this Miami Hurricanes program. Now, you get into Micah Newton as a football player, one, there's a lot of different ways he can win. I mean, he can win with speed to power, just putting his hands right on opposing offensive linemen, putting them right into the lap of the quarterback. Because he's only 6'2", very similar to Ruben Bain. I mean, a thick lower half, a powerful lower half. He can get under offensive linemen who might be a little bit bigger and just play with better leverage and lower pads. But he's also a guy that has a really good first step off the line of scrimmage and can win on the outside shoulder as well. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that Micah Newton can win as a defensive lineman, whether you're playing him as an edge rusher, playing him as a 3-tech defensive lineman. I think there are a lot of ways he can win. And I also really like how you're kind of balancing out the body types in this edge rusher room, where you go back to the 2024 class, guys like Booker Pickett or Marquise Lightfoot, these long Ferrari-type edge rushers. Let's go get a Mack truck. Micah Newton at 6'2", 255 pounds, this kid has put together a lot of different kind of body types that Mario Cristobal is filling this Miami Hurricanes defensive line with. Now, that's enough of me talking. Let's get into the film. Really productive kid. When you take a look at the numbers, 26 tackles for a loss, 13 sacks. You're going to see him and Jarquez Carter just, for lack of better terms, just utterly dominate opposing offensive line for about 2 minutes of this film. Now, you take a look at Micah Newton. I think the first thing that's really impressive is the twitch and bend. I mean, this is a guy that normally wins with speed to power. But take a look at a little bit, like you freeze frame this right here. We're gonna have to go back because I missed my pause there. You look at Micah Newton, one really good first step, but two, I mean, look at the bend that he has. I mean, the ankle hip mobility in terms of running that arc. That's some big time stuff out of Micah Newton. It's hard to find bodies that are that big that have that kind of flexibility, obviously knocking the football out, making a play. Micah Newton, nice bend. Now you see him working more as a 3-tech. And again, he has just such a motor, working through a double team, just a relentless pass rusher. And I think that leads to a lot of his production. I always go back to Aiden Hutchinson. Aiden Hutchinson was an awesome pass rusher. He had a lot of his production in that 2022 year just based on playing his absolute tail off. And I think Micah Newton, is kind of one of those guys where you turn on the film, he's working through double teams. He's consistently just pinning his ears back and not giving up on plays and getting after quarterbacks. Really like that about Micah Newton. Again, the motor runs hot. Again, working through a double team. Really good athlete when it comes to closing in on a quarterback, which I think is a really important conversation. I mean, you look at, love the hand usage here, getting off the line, playing that 3-tech. When you move him to that 3-tech position, he's working on interior offensive linemen. They struggle with his quickness and athleticism. That's just kind of plain and simple. Swiping hands, just kind of putting this guard in the ground, in the dust, you might say. Working on the 3-tech again, just relentless kid. You run back, working through two different blocks here, continuing to get after the quarterback. You see Jarquez Carter just blowing up that pocket as well. I feel bad for so many of these offensive lines that had to block guys like Micah Newton and Jarquez Carter because both of those kids are so dang powerful. You continue to work through the film. And again, you just really like what Micah Newton brought. This is how he wins a lot. I'm going to play with low pads. I'm going to get right underneath this tackle, and I'm just going to walk him to the lap of the quarterback, collapse the pocket. I don't know if Micah Newton's going to be a guy that goes for 10-plus sacks a game, but he's going to be extremely disruptive. And I think that's what you want to see from your defensive lineman. Now, you take a look at Miami's class in 2025. There are some nice pivots in this class, right? I don't think Miami hit on every single defensive lineman that they wanted to hit on, especially at the top of their board, but we always have this conversation. What separates solid programs on the recruiting trail from really good recruiting programs? Those kind of backup plans. I mean, Miami went after some legitimate defensive linemen, guys like Iose Epinesa. I don't expect them to give up on some of these defensive linemen, quite frankly, but the ability to pivot and still fill your class with serviceable bodies, really good football players that you've evaluated in person and you like, that matters. And that's kind of what Miami's done. You kind of look at Micah Newton, but also very similar Dante Simpson. I'm going to try to find him here. From Shamadan Madonna Prep. I think very similar recruitments in the sense that maybe they had some other guys higher on the boards, but hey, we're going to go pivot and get really good football players and flip some of these commitments. I think Miami always knew. Dante Simpson was committed to Maryland. Obviously, Micah Newton was committed to NC State. They knew they could flip those commitments. They said, we're going to go after some of these big fish. If we miss, we got some really good football players in the state of Florida that we know we can land their commitments from. That's exactly what they did. Micah Newton's going to be a fun one to watch. I just like how this kid is wired. He plays extremely hard. Again, Ruben Bain, once he gets on campus, coach him up a little bit. Ruben Bain 2.0 maybe. Again, that's some lofty expectations for a kid that's going into his senior year, but very similar body types, very similar play style. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.